So I spent a very pleasant afternoon yesterday, sort of talking with and chilling with a young sort of niece of mine who is very into painting. I let her have some of my painting supplies. We were at like a family gathering and so on, and I was just sort of sitting there watching her paint and showing her some drawings and showing her how to draw and stuff, which is my usual sort of that's my default position at family gatherings. I usually go find a table somewhere, take out the art materials, and then eventually, inevitably, any small children around will get really fascinated by the art materials, and then we end up having a little discussion about art. And then what also inevitably happens after these family gatherings is that the parent who has been very proudly watching their kid get into the art materials and start to draw and like spend a whole afternoon quietly just making things in the corner will ask me about what to do to support that kid's creativity, what to do to support that kid's art journey. And I had a conversation with the mother later on over WhatsApp about it. And just like little thoughts that I have. I'm not a parent, I'm not a child psychologist, but I do have a little experience from myself being a creative who grew up in a home that wasn't necessarily creative, but my parents were supportive, and just like some thoughts on how to be that supportive parent to a child showing promise, and maybe some of my thoughts also on as an educator of young people going into the industry on whether or not you should be trying to get your kid to be that person who is trying to being that person who is like, are you going to encourage them to try and take this up as a career? Are you going to support them to that extent, or should you be supporting them in other directions because you're worried about the stability of an art career? So I have thoughts about that. So the first thing I sort of told my friend, my family member with this precocious youngster was, I think at an early age, preteen, it's very good to have just paper in the house. Just have some art materials, have some craft stations, have some stuff where the kid can, in their more bored moments, boredom is also a very important part of being a young creative, like have a little station where they can go, they can work, and give them some time to be bored. Also give them some time to like do stuff with their boredom, to sort of create a rich internal life, the same way you would leave a kid with books in a room and no TV, to encourage their reading skills. Like you would also do that kind of with craft materials. And it's a great way for kids to learn to regulate their emotions, regulate their boredom, without having to reach for stimuli, without having to reach for something to fill that time, fill that space with. There are times when like your creativity changes. So maybe when the child is 12, 13 years old, going into their tween years, going into high school, going out of primary school into middle school and so on, there's times where like a young creative wants to be a bit more private. They want to keep diaries and so on. Maybe they'll keep art diaries. Maybe they will want a little computer, or they'll want like a private, like their phone becomes a very private space, for example. And I'm not going to get into the like how much control a parent has to have over their child's digital privacy, but that might be the point at which they start to get on a family PC. Maybe they have a little cheap drawing tablet that can stand a few knocks, that can withstand being thrown down and so on. I don't necessarily like to start kids on too early on what we call tablet displays, kind of like an iPad, or the bigger, more professional version of an iPad, which might be something like a Cintiq, a Wacom Cintiq, or like a screen tablet that you draw on the screen, purely because one, it's like 10 times more expensive to get that thing, and it's an experience honestly you want to work up to. As an artist, I firmly believe in kids being introduced to graphic tablets, which are non-screen surfaces that they draw on, and then they look up at a screen, rather like if you were playing a game and you had the controller in your hand but you were looking up at a screen, that sort of experience. Because honestly it's just a lot cheaper, and you can draw just as well, and it's less likely to break, and they also will be spending a ton less money in the future. If they want to upgrade their drawing experience, they can upgrade to a screen tablet. I honestly find it's hard to go back, and when I encourage young artists to kind of keep their skills maybe on a graphic tablet as long as possible, until you have serious bucks for. I mean, in my day, it was like you wanted to go for a Cintiq, you wanted to go for like the big Wacom 24-inch Cintiqs or something, rather than your little 5-inch graphic tablet in front of you. And those were easily 25,000 rand, like at bottom maybe 25, 30,000 rand. So it was crazy money, but it was a goal eventually. And then, obviously these sort of grow up, and once you get into the digital space, there's lots of free options. There's Krita for like a free Photoshop. You don't have to get Photoshop subscriptions. There's Blender for free 3D, which is like really excellent. A lot of studios are actually moving to Blender because of its open source model. And yeah, there's tons of options. Like pretty much by the time they start learning computers and really seriously getting into computers, or maybe starting to learn a little coding when they're 13, 14, 16, however old that starts these days, that's a great. All of those options can be made available to them, and really the sky's the limit from there in terms of what they can create. I won't discuss like how much time alone a young artist needs or what kind of fandoms they should stay away from, but it is a point in time where people get, they start to get really into their own, obscure fandoms, into sort of like new friends. They start to seek out friends with the same interests and so on. It's always very lovely to see young animators meet each other at the school where I work. At the college where I work, where it's like you just see all these young people finding their tribe after often being the only artsy person in their high school or maybe in their class, and then finding their tribe is really a wonderful extra dimension to their lives and to teaching. So another thing I kind of want to touch on is what should you be encouraging people is if you see your kid really getting into art or really just loving art, what is your responsibility maybe as an adult? And I don't want to dictate anyone's responsibility as an adult, but as someone who grew up, was a professional for many years, an art professional for many years, now teaches other students to become art professionals, I think there's kind of quite a simple answer to that. I think a lot of parents are very anxious that if their child is showing promise, that this means they will inevitably become an art professional. That is not so. It's not always so. But what you could encourage is a healthy relationship with art, and relationship with art that is not purely capitalistic, a relationship with art that doesn't mean they have to make money at it in order for it to be legitimate. Art can be a beautiful extra dimension to life. It can be a source of great pleasure and enrichment in life. It really doesn't have to be your whole personality, and it doesn't have to be your whole job. As a parent, I don't think you have to play the consumer of this art. You are often your child's first audience, but you don't have to try and manage their expectations or gas them up unnecessarily when it comes to how their art will be received in the outside world. The outside world will very much do that for them, I can promise you. So you don't have to play the part of the skeptical, unpleasable, void audience, or the totally undiscerning, anything they do is a genius, is a work of genius kind of audience either. I think you just need to be kind of a patron. You just kind of need to be their first patron in the Renaissance sense, in the sense of you give them space and materials and financial backing in the form of them eating at your house every day to be able to do some work, and just kind of be there for them. You can be proud of them. Absolutely. You can be proud that they have these skills, and encouraging of like, yeah, you should try that. Yeah, you should enter for that. Yeah, this is such a great work. And you can be honest about it, but you don't need to try and guess what the outside world is going to do to them and how that's going to affect them. You can kind of just react from yourself and just, make your kids believe that you are proud of them and that you support them. And again, it doesn't have to be the extent of that support does not need to come in the form of this is great, but will you make money at it? Because that kind of again takes the focus off art for its own sake and puts the focus on, if anything, that's going to drive your child to become a professional artist, which I know is many parents' worst nightmare in a sense. You don't have to encourage anything. You can just encourage the art for the art's sake and the art for enjoyment's sake. Making your child believe that their art is not legitimate until it pays for itself is possibly the easiest way to make them confused about the idea of that they are not an artist until they get paid for it, until they become professional at it. And as an art professional, I can tell you that is, while it is a very innovating and a beautiful journey to take, it's not for everybody. And stability absolutely is not part of that journey for many people. Many people limit their art careers by a huge degree by kind of wanting to try and meld total stability with total freedom of expression, and it really becomes a recipe for unhappiness after a while. I see a lot of young professionals going into try and find that permanent studio job that is largely absent and doesn't really exist, and they struggle for a very long time trying to find the stability rather than kind of embracing the uncertainty and the opportunities of uncertainty. So something to think about there. Thank you for listening to my thoughts on this as, again, a non-parent and an educator and a professional artist only.